It says 21st century feminism and the importance of intersectionality. Well, when I first read the title, it said 21st century feminism, and I was thinking that a lot of people who would come to the conference, they would assume that 21st century feminism, so there's probably a white, really educated, probably middle-class woman speaking about feminism, because that's what we usually get. But hey, I'm not white, and I haven't prepared a speech or anything like a lot of others. I'm just going to be speaking from the heart, and just before I go on to speaking about what feminism means to me and what intersectionality means to me, I would talk about my personal experiences of how I was first introduced to the term feminism. I was born and raised in this really small town in Russia, Rostov. I'm sure a lot of people haven't heard about it. And the first person who introduced me to feminism was my grandmother. So my grandmother was born in Afghanistan, in a really small village in Afghanistan, and just like many other women back home, she got married when she was 16. So she never went to school, she wasn't educated, she didn't know how to read and write, completely illiterate. And she went through a lot of struggle in her life to become the woman that she had become 20, 30 years after living in Russia. The first struggle she went through was that my grandfather was paralyzed when she was about 20 or something, and at that time she had 2 kids. And this woman, she became the man of the family. That's what back home people call a really strong woman, the man of the family. She became the man of the family, and she took in charge. She became a working woman. She earned for the family. She went through the norms and sent my mother and my aunt to school. It wasn't a norm back then in a village in Afghanistan. Girls wouldn't go to school. And 20 years later, my mother was a doctor, so was my aunt, and my uncle was an engineer. So she raised really strong, educated 4 kids. And in Russia, with us and my family, she was perceived as a leader of the family, and everyone would just ask her before making any decisions. And my grandmother would always tell me that we live in a really patriarchal society. And for you to really become what you want to become or to lead, you have to fight for it. No one is gonna give you your rights on the plate. You have to fight for it, you have to make sacrifices. So that was the first stage of the feminism I was introduced to, being around strong women, housewives, become leaders. That was the first stage. But living in Russia, there was other forms of oppression, there was other forms of discrimination as well, like we all know. There was a lot of homophobia around me, there's a lot of shadism and racism around me. I'll give you one example of my own family. My uncle married a woman who was a lot darker in skin tone, and everyone else in my family, Afghans are usually light. So when we used to went out, despite the fact we were migrants, we never faced racism, we spoke perfect Russian, everything was all right. But my uncle's wife, she would sometimes get stopped by the police and they would ask for her documents. And then it was completely all right with us. We didn't question that. We never asked why. Why is there so much shadism around us? It was completely fine. She would show her documents. Yeah, okay, it's working perfectly all right. And there was a lot of homophobia as well. I was a child, so I wouldn't question all of that. So that phase was over, and then I moved to the UK a couple of years later to live with my mum, because my mum lived in the UK with my stepfather and my other siblings. So I moved to the UK to go to the school to the UK, and I thought it was a good idea for me to come to the UK because I was like a really smart child and I achieved quite a lot whilst I was in primary schooling. So came to the UK and did my secondary schooling in the UK. I was still a feminist. I was still brought up with feminist ideologies. But then I wanted to know more. I wanted to get more involved. I wanted to read a lot more about feminism. I read books about feminism, mainstream feminism, third wave feminism, radical feminism. There were so many different forms. Sometimes it does get a little bit confusing. So I read about it, and whilst I was 16 and I finished my secondary schooling, I decided to become more involved within the movement. And I joined a group in my local area. I'm from Southeast London, so I live around Lewisham and Greenwich. So I joined a local group, and I still remember when I went to the first meeting. Well, there was a lot of other women in the room, and they were all white. They were all white, highly educated, probably middle class. Well, not everyone is middle class in Southeast London, but they looked well dressed, and they spoke really well. And I was this 16-year-old child. I wasn't white. I was a migrant. So I couldn't relate to it, but I wanted to relate to it. I wanted to be a part of the discussion. I wanted to be a part of the debate. Constantly felt excluded, but didn't stop, kept on going. Doing a lot of research on feminism, radical feminism, and then came a point in my life where I fell into the whole white savior complex, and I thought, because I'm an Afghan woman and I'm studying in the UK, maybe I could just go back home and I would save all the women like my grandmother, though she saved herself. I would save other women like my grandmother who probably don't have access to education. Back home, some women are not even treated like human beings, let alone talking about like equal pay, etc. So that was the stage where I was falling into this complex of being a savior. But luckily, all of that changed when I joined uni. So came to university, finished my schooling, but there was a stage in my life where I was kind of scared of myself, like being feminism, this radical feminist, believing that, oh, if you want to be a feminist, if you want to be a strong woman, you have to be a careerist, you have to have a good job, you have to be out on people's faces, you have to be talking to people and be like, yeah, well, I'm a feminist. So yeah, I was, at the same time, I was kind of scared of the whole perception of myself, looking at myself in the mirror. I was a bit scared of it. So I came to uni, and at that point I was a little bit isolated from the movement, and but then there was a feminist society in Kingston that I became a part of. I signed up in my first year. I didn't go to a lot of events in my first year. Second year, I decided that maybe I want to get a little bit more involved. I joined the committee. I became part of the committee, and luckily, the president of the society was another brown woman, and me, an Afghan woman who was born and raised in Europe, but a Muslim woman being part of the society. So what we wanted to do was to change the perception of feminism, the stereotype that goes around it. And last year we did a lot of work, and what was the turning point in my perception of feminism was when I ran for the women's officer with the Students' Union last year. So I ran for it, I got elected, and it just opened up so many doors for me, because then I discovered intersectionality. And I'm lucky that I did, but there's a lot of feminists out there, young feminists, who don't. After getting involved within the liberation movement on a national level, I discovered black feminism, I read about it, and that was sort of a saving point for me. It kind of rescued me. And so this year what we have done with the Feminist Society is that our theme for the year is intersectionality. So just to go around, who knows what intersectionality means? Has anyone heard the term before? Yeah, would anyone like to tell me what intersectionality means to them? Maybe anyone? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
But it means that I don't have to define, or I don't have to divide experience of oppression because I'm colored from experiences of oppression for being working class, being etc.
So yeah, exactly. That's what intersectionality means. Intersectionality is about making the mainstream movement more accessible to all women. So whether it's black women, transgender women, or Muslim women, because us as, let me give you the example of myself. I'm an Asian Muslim woman, and I would constantly feel excluded from the mainstream movement because their perception of feminism is different from the kind of feminism I was brought up with, from the kind of feminism that my grandmother taught me about. And that's the reason why we need intersectionality to make the movement more inclusive to everyone. So what happens is that white feminists refuses to acknowledge that they benefit from white supremacist patriarchal system. And it's out in the media. The example of Emma Watson, she didn't really mention her privileges of a white woman when she did that speech. So that's why we need intersectionality, and we need to make the movement more inclusive for women to be a part of it, and not just the usual bra-burning feminists that you hear about, but all women, because us as women, like Lizzie and Amy mentioned earlier, that gay people come in all shapes and sizes. Women come in all forms. We could have different religions, we could have different race. So yeah, that is my experience of intersectionality, and that's how I discovered it. But then the question is, if we really want to change the perception of mainstream feminism, the only way is to make it intersectional, make it acceptable. And I would just end with a small quote that says, "My feminism would be intersectional, or it would be bullshit." Thank you.